Should you reduce red meat if you're worried about the planet? That is the question of the day. Hello, this is Aishan, aka the Omnivorist. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner in Paris, France, and I'm passionate about helping busy moms recover their energy and vitality through real food and healthy habits. Welcome to my weekly series, Ask the Omnivorist, Food and Health Nuggets for Busy Mamas. Now, today is the last part of my three-part series on red meat. In the first two episodes, I tried to establish for you why properly sourced, good quality, grass-fed red meat can be a part of a healthy diet. And I also told you that you need to be eating a ton more vegetables than you're probably currently doing right now. But that does not mean that you should become vegetarian to be in good health. As I explained, we're talking about nutrient density, and we need to be thinking about eating foods that are as nutritious as possible, both from the animal and the plant world. So far, so good. Now, what I want to tell you today is that advice that I gave you earlier remains, even when we take into consideration ecological concerns. Now, you've all heard the meme by now that livestock emissions pose a grave risk for the earth and for global warming. That the way we raise animals for feed for human consumption is very problematic. As you know, I agree with this. I agree that I already told you in the last few episodes why raising livestock in feedlots and feeding them grains, that is something that is utterly, it's just atrocious for them and for us as well, and it's also bad for the planet. That far we can agree upon. However, when we start looking at things a little more closely, the reality becomes a little more complex. And that is what I'd like to get into a little bit today. Now, first of all, there are those who dispute those numbers about livestock emissions, saying that they are, depending on how you calculate that number could be a little less clear cut than it sounds like. So that is one thing. But there is something else actually that I would really like to get into today. So even though, like I said, our current system of industrial meat production is absolutely atrocious, there is actually a way to raise livestock that could actually be healing for the earth. Okay? You have heard that right. Actually, grazing animals, herbivore animals, can be a part of saving the planet. And I will explain how that is. As you know, I also really like to talk about an evolutionary perspective. And I also talk about the fact that in nature, animal and plant, they exist in a continuum. There is no bright line between those two things. And we as humans, we are also part of nature. We are part of that food chain, okay? So I always like to go back to the basics about these issues whenever we can. And now this evolutionary point of view also goes for the animals that we raise for our own consumption. Now, ruminant animals have also evolved in a certain way. And when we get away from what's biologically appropriate for them, that's when we start getting into trouble. So ruminant animals, they have evolved to eat grass. So this means, for example, ruminants have a whole extra stomach just to be digesting that grass. We humans cannot. Our guts are not equipped to break down the cellulose that is in grass. We can't. But the animals can. And what they do, that process they do, is they graze on that grass, and they actually end up becoming good quality protein, healthy protein for us humans. And how does this happen? And actually, the thing is, there are management practices called holistic livestock management that actually tries to mimic the way things happen in nature. For example, wild ruminants, for example, animals such as bison or wildebeest, how they act in the wild is they will move in packs, in herds, because they actually have predator pressure. They are trying to escape being eaten by a lion. So what they do is they are always moving in large herds, and they go into a part of land and they graze it intensively, and then they move on. Okay, so apparently what happens here is that their activity is actually really beneficial for the earth and for the land. So what they do is they hump with their hooves, actually stomp that ground, which means that when it rains, the rainwater actually gets to penetrate that ground instead of just running off in many parts of the world that have become desertified, unfortunately. And also, the roots of the grass that they've been eating will help sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And then when they move on, that patch of land will get to regenerate, will get to rest and regenerate more grass. So this process is actually something that farmers have been, or certain holistic farmers have been starting to mimic. And as much as possible, have their animals graze a certain patch of land and move them around regularly in order to mimic and basically get the best benefits. And when it's done in this way, livestock can be actually really crucial for healing these ecosystems. And actually, it will even produce a net carbon sink, which means it will actually end up trapping more carbon in the soil than the carbon that was released as a result of raising the livestock. So when you start looking at things like this, it just becomes a lot more complex, doesn't it? So I just want to make sure I've got everything for you that I want to say. Now, there is another thing I want you to consider, and that is something that almost never gets mentioned when we get into these discussions about, animal versus plant food, etc. And that is the fact that the alternative, what is the alternative? Okay, we are agriculture itself. Okay, which is the dawn of civilization, what is considered the dawn of civilization 12,000 years ago. Agriculture itself actually takes a huge toll on the earth. To be cultivating our crops, our food crops, you have to clear that land from anything else that's living, okay? Especially the way we do it in monoculture, in these huge cash crop model that we have today. So, which means that it's not as if, when you look at it that way, that soy burger seems a lot less virtuous than actually a grass-fed steak, okay? Because the method, the actual, the effect, the deleterious effect on the earth is actually sometimes even worse. So I just want you to keep that in mind. And actually, the kind of management of livestock that I mentioned earlier, there are those who say that is actually completely, totally indispensable to reversing the path, the desertification of the world, of the earth. I will actually post a TED talk about that is super interesting that I invite you to watch. When you look at it from this perspective, it just all of a sudden becomes a little more complex. So what I invite you to do is to, instead of having a knee-jerk reaction about, I worry about the earth, which actually we all must, especially as mothers, but instead of having that knee-jerk reaction, I invite you to consider all the complexities of the situation, and once again going back to making sure to source your meat properly from the kinds of producers who are actually trying to make a difference and who are trying to restore balance into ecosystems. So it is actually much more of a win-win when it's presented in this way, isn't it? So I really hope that this series has been useful to you. I hope it's helped you get some more clarity. And even if you're still confused, I hope that it's kind of given you better questions to ask for next time. Okay? So if you haven't already, make sure to join our private Facebook group, the Mama Reboot Community, where I share even more tips and tricks and provide a backstage pass into my own kitchen. I will post the link in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this video, if you found it useful, please feel free to like it and share it. And I will see you right here next week. Have a wonderful day.